Imagine being able to sort of peer inside yourself, seeing the electrical signals, zapping around in your brain.
Or the power in your muscles.
Exactly, surging through your muscles.
Yeah,
And
right.
visualized like in real time on dynamic charts. It sounds incredibly complex, right?
It really does.
I mean, how do you even start to take that raw biological data? It's so intricate, whether it's brain, heart, muscles, and turn it into something you can actually see, something you can understand, interact with, without needing like 5 different PhDs.
Yeah, that's really the core challenge, isn't it? Working with biomedical data is incredibly rich stuff.
But maybe overwhelming.
Oh, definitely overwhelming sometimes. Often it's kind of locked away in complex formats, or you need these specialized tools.
Right, which are probably
Often
expensive.
very expensive,
Yeah.
yeah. And just not accessible to everyone who might be interested.
Okay, and that really gets to the heart of this deep dive. We've been looking into source material about this platform. It's called Bionic Chaos. And it seems like it's specifically built to, well, tackle that exact accessibility problem head on.
Yeah, the sources definitely frame it that way. Like, Bionic Chaos is this hub really aiming to pull back the curtain on biomedical data processing.
Slide the curtain. I like that.
And their stated mission, it's quite clear in the material, is basically to democratize access to these kinds of tools and resources.
Right. Okay. So making them available not just for the high-level researchers, but
For a much wider audience, exactly. Researchers, sure, but also educators, students.
Students too.
Yeah, particularly the sources mentioned in fields like, say, biomedical engineering or neuroscience.
Makes sense. So it's about opening up data that was maybe pretty closed off before.
Precisely. Making it less about, who has the fanciest software or the cutting-edge lab, and more about enabling anyone who's interested to actually explore this stuff, to learn, to work with this really fascinating data.
Okay, so let's dive into how they actually tackle this data challenge.
Yeah.
Our sources, they highlight a pretty wide range of tools that Bionic Chaos offers.
Yeah, it's quite broad.
Seems like everything from like core data analysis stuff to these platforms that are described as highly interactive, advanced software solutions even.
And what's really interesting is just the breadth of biological signals they cover.
Okay.
The sources point to tools for visualizing, analyzing, well, everything from brain signals.
Like EEG?
EEG, yeah, and also IEEG. And then looking at muscle activity, so EMG specifically.
EMG, okay.
And even exploring heart rhythms with tools for ECG and PPG data.
Okay, let's maybe pause there for a sec, because those acronyms, they can sound a bit daunting.
Sure.
So EEG and IEA, that's electrical activity in the brain, yeah. EEG is outside the skull, electrodes on the scalp.
That's right, standard clinical EEG.
And IEG is inside the skull, like more invasive.
Exactly. Intracranial EEG. Often used in specific medical cases, like epilepsy surgery planning. Think of it as different ways to listen to the brain's electrical symphony.
One from afar, one up close.
Yeah.
Got it.
And EMG is similar, but for muscles, recording the electrical signals when muscle fibers contract.
Right. And ECD is the heart's rhythm, the EKG we know from the doctor's office.
Yep. And PPG, that's related to blood volume changes, often measured with light, like on your smartwatch tracking your pulse.
Ah, okay. So Bionic Chaos provides ways to look at all these fundamental internal signals. And the sources mentioned specific tools for this, right? Like for muscle data.
Myoscope.
Yes, Myoscope for analyzing EMG. And they even mentioned Myomach.
Myomach, a simulator.
Yeah, simulator.
Right.
Which is interesting because it lets you actually create synthetic EMG data.
Oh, neat. So you could test things out.
Exactly. Test analysis techniques or just play around, see how changing parameters affects the signal without needing, a real person hooked up.
That makes a lot of sense for learning. Totally. And for heart data, there's PulseViz, another tool, this one for visualizing synthetic heart rate data.
Synthetic again.
Yeah, so you can tweak factors like oxygen saturation or maybe introduce noise and see how that messes with the signal visually.
That simulation aspect seems really key for learning, for experimenting safely.
I think so.
Okay, what about the brain data tools? Beyond just looking at the raw, squiggly lines, what else can you do? What analysis do they make accessible?
Well, the sources detail tools like EGView, that's for general EEG visualization, but they go deeper too. There's a spectrogram tool, for instance.
A spectrogram. Sounds complex. What does that actually show you?
Okay, think of it like a musical score, but for your brain activity. So instead of just seeing the signal wiggle up and down over time, a spectrogram shows you the frequencies within that signal, how the different frequency bands change over time.
So like, are the low frequencies dominant now or the high frequencies?
Exactly. Lower frequencies might be linked to sleep or relaxation, higher frequencies to active thinking or concentration. Seeing this visually is, well, it's crucial for understanding different brain states or how the brain responds to something.
Right, so you're seeing patterns you totally miss just looking at the raw data trace.
Precisely.
And they have versions of this for both the surface EEG and that intracranial IEG.
Yep. The sources mention IEG spectrum specifically for analyzing frequency content in that internal brain data. They even have a denoising version.
Denoising, getting rid of the noise.
Yeah, using techniques like wavelets.
Wavelets.
Yeah.
Okay, another technical term drop.
Mm-hmm.
Briefly, what do wavelets do here? How do they help?
Okay, so wavelets are these really powerful mathematical tools. They help us break down complex signals like EEG into simpler components, but across different scales or resolutions.
Okay, like zooming in.
Sort of. Imagine trying to separate out all the instruments in an orchestra playing at once, the low rumble of the bass, the sharp hit of a drum, the long notes of violins. Wavelets help kind of isolate those different types of signal components, which is incredibly useful for filtering out unwanted noise, like muscle artifacts in EEG, or for spotting specific, maybe subtle patterns buried in the data.
That sounds super useful, especially, yeah, with biological signals, which can be notoriously noisy.
Definitely.
And speaking of specific patterns, the sources highlighted tools focusing on some pretty specific clinical applications, like using something called joint time frequency scattering for seizure detection in EEG. That sounds advanced.
It is pretty advanced stuff. Joint time frequency scattering, it's a relatively cutting-edge technique in signal processing.
So having that in a platform like this.
That's a great example of that democratization mission we talked about, right? It's not just providing like the basic tools, it's making some serious analytical power accessible.
And applying it to seizure detection.
Yeah, it means researchers, maybe clinicians, could potentially develop or test methods to spot those critical patterns in brain activity faster, maybe more accurately.
Wow, okay. That potential to improve diagnosis or treatment down the line, that's really powerful. And the sources mentioned Seizure Zone too, a 3D brain mapping tool.
Yes, Seizure Zone. It lets you visualize which areas of the brain might be involved during seizure activity, often using data you get from techniques like the ones we just discussed.
So you can actually see where in the brain things are happening.
Kind of, yeah. See the geography of the activity.
Okay, this brings up a really important point. How do you make these abstract concepts, this complex data, visual and understandable? Not just for the experts, but for students, for newcomers.
Yeah, that's crucial.
The sources mention tools that seem designed exactly for that, like BioVen.
BioVen is a great example for that. It visualizes how different biomedical fields intersect using a Venn diagram.
Oh, okay. Simple concept.
Super simple, intuitive concept, right? Overlapping circles showing common ground, but applied here to show how different areas of biomedicine, ones that might seem totally separate, actually connect and overlap.
So it helps you grasp those interdisciplinary links visually.
Exactly. Much better than just reading a list of fields.
And my personal favorite example, from the sources anyway, illustrating this power of visualization, is that Datasaurus doesn't. You have to explain what that shows us.
Oh, the Datasaurus doesn't. It's fantastic, isn't it?
It's brilliant.
So it takes 12 different data sets,
Okay.
12 sets of points, and for all 12, the basic summary statistics are exactly the same.
Like the average, the standard deviation.
The mean, median, standard deviation,
Okay.
even the correlation coefficient, identical across all 12 data sets.
Okay, so on paper, they look the same if you just run the numbers.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
then you plot them, you actually visualize the data points,
Yeah.
and they look dramatically, wildly different.
Yeah.
One might be a nice straight line, another just a blob of scattered dots, another one looks like
A dinosaur.
a dinosaur.
Yeah.
Literally, the points form the outline of a dinosaur.
It's amazing.
It is, and it's such a powerful, memorable way to show that you absolutely cannot rely on summary statistics alone.
You just can't.
You have to visualize your data. You have to look at it to find the hidden patterns, to understand its real shape, its distribution.
And avoid being totally misled by numbers that look identical.
Precisely.
It really hammers home how vital visualization is.
Mm.
You know, for getting those aha moments about data you'd otherwise completely miss. It really connects back to your goal as a listener of wanting to gain knowledge quickly, but also thoroughly.
Absolutely. Seeing these principles visualized is just so much more impactful than reading about statistical pitfalls in a textbook.
For sure. And the platform includes other tools too, right? Things
Yeah.
that might seem a bit different, but maybe rely on similar underlying ideas.
Yeah, they mention a hearing test tool, for example,
Yeah.
with real-time visualization, and you can download an audiogram.
Okay.
And also an image compression tool that uses wavelet transforms.
Ah, wavelets again.
Yeah, the same technique we talked about for denoising brain signals.
So that shows the versatility, right? Applying these signal processing techniques like wavelets, not just to brainwaves or muscle signals.
But across different types of data, audio in the hearing test, images in the compression tool, and that complex brain activity we discussed.
Interesting.
And they even touch on mental health. There's something called mental-ing mentioned.
Mental-ing.
Yeah, framing mental health or aspects of it in an engineering context, like a dynamic system.
Framing mental health as a dynamic system.
Mm.
What does that actually imply? What does that mean?
Well, it suggests you could potentially model aspects of mental states or processes using concepts that are familiar in engineering. Things like signal processing, system dynamics. It offers a different kind of lens, potentially allowing you to identify dynamic shifts or patterns using more objective measures, maybe complementing the traditional subjective assessments. It's definitely an intriguing way to approach a really complex area.
It really is. And looking ahead, they mention NeuroGPT, suggesting integrating advanced AI like GPT models with EEG data analysis.
Yeah, that points towards exploring some really cutting-edge applications in the future.
So they're not just sticking with current tech.
Seems not. It indicates they're looking at how the latest AI advancements might be applied to help decipher complex neural data, really pushing the boundaries.
Okay, so let's try and recap a bit. We've seen how Bionic Chaos, based on these sources, offers this really remarkably diverse set of tools,
It's quite a range.
covering everything from those fundamental biological signals, brain activity with EEG and IEG, muscle signals via Myoscope, and that Myomach simulator.
Heart rhythms with ECG and Pulsiviz.
Right. Even explorations into mental health modeling with Mentalizan, and those crucial general data concepts like the Datasaurus dozen, showing why you need to visualize.
Or BioVen showing how different fields connect.
Yeah. And what seems really powerful here, connecting it back, is how these interactive tools and visualizations directly tackle that challenge of understanding complex stuff.
Things like the Datasaurus or BioVen, they aren't just, showing data points. They're illustrating principles. Principles about data analysis, about how fields relate in a visual way that's just much easier to grasp than reading paragraphs in a book.
Absolutely. And the sources were clear. This isn't just for the pros, right? They specifically mention resources, project proposals aimed at students.
Yeah, underscoring that educational aspect. Making these complex tools genuinely accessible for learning, for hands-on exploration.
Which makes learning and research, too, I guess, way more engaging.
Definitely. I mean, instead of just reading definitions of, say, EEG frequency bands or how wavelet denoising is supposed to work,
Right.
you could potentially use their tools, like the EEG band power visualization or the IEG spectrum denoise, to actually explore those concepts directly, hands-on.
And things like the hearing test or the image compression tool.
They provide really tangible applications you can interact with. It brings the theory to life, makes it much less abstract.
Okay, this opens up some really fascinating possibilities, doesn't it? So here's a final thought, maybe something for you, the listener, to mull over building on all this. Given this increasing power we have to visualize and analyze these really fundamental biological signals, brain activity, muscle signals, heart rhythms, even models of mental states, how might understanding these internal signals through accessible tools like the ones Bionic Chaos is aiming for, how might that fundamentally change our approach? Our approach to health monitoring, maybe personalized learning, or even just our own personal well-being in the future?